Welcome to part 41 of our series on building a Zelda-like game in Phaser 3. In this video, we'll add a dialogue component to display messages to the player. We'll implement show and hide functionality, create reward text for the chest, and add input locking to ensure smooth interactions. If you're new here, this is part of a full series where we create a Zelda-inspired game from scratch. Check out the playlist link in the description to start from the beginning. Alright, let's dive in and build our dialogue system. Now that we finished creating our UI component for our game over state, we're going to work on adding a new component to our game, and this is going to be our dialogue component. Our dialogue component is going to be used for displaying messages to our player, and how we're going to use it is when our player collects an item from our chest, we're going to show our dialogue modal, and we're going to display information about the item our player just collected. This component we build will be reusable for our game, and then that way we can do other things, like use this component for when our player talks to an NPC, or if there's a story event, we can use it for displaying what's happening in the game. And so now for this component, when we display it to our player, we're going to want to pause our current scene so that way our player can't move around our scene and our enemies won't be able to hurt our player while they're reading this message. And so for this dialogue component, we're going to add this to our UI scene, and then that way we can display it in our UI and it'll always be displayed in the same location to our player. To start building our new component, let's jump over to our UI scene. For our new component, this will consist of a couple different game objects. The first will be our text game object with the message we want to display to our player, and our second one will be a border or a background that will display behind our text game object, so that way we can easily read our text. To keep track of these game objects, we'll need to add a container to our class. So let's add a new property, and we're going to call this dialog container. So for our type, we'll have our phaser, our game objects, our container. And now we'll want to add one more property, and this will be for our dialog container text. So for our text, we'll want to be able to reuse that text game object and update the text string we want to display to our player. And so we'll need to keep track of that. So let's do dialog container, and we'll do our text. For our type, we'll do our phaser, our game objects. Now let's do our text game object. So now for create our game objects, let's come down to our create method. So after we create our HUD container, let's create a new dialog container. So we're going to do this, we're going to reference our dialog container. We're going to say equal to this.add.container. Now for our position, we're going to do 32 for our X. We'll do 142 for our Y. And now for our child game objects, let's add in our background first. So we're going to do this, we'll do add, we'll do our image. Now for our position, we're going to do 0, 0. We'll do our asset keys. And let's do our UI and our dialog. Do our default frame of 0, and let's do set origin, and we'll do 0. So after we create our container, now we want to add in our text game object. So we'll do this, we'll do our dialog container text, will be equal to this.add.text. And for our position, let's do 14 for our X, 14 for our Y. And we're just going to write test for our initial string. And now we want to provide our font configuration. For now, we'll do an empty object. And let's do set origin, and let's do 0. After we create our text game object, now we want to add it to our container. So we'll do this, our dialog container. Let's do add, and we'll add in our new text. So after we save, we should see our new component show up in our game. And now we just need to update the styling on our text game object. Alright, so for the text styling on our game object, we're going to want to use the same styling that we added to our text in our game over scene. So if we jump over to our game over scene, since we want to use that same styling across multiple scenes in our game, let's place this in our common folder. So if we go into our source, our common.ts. Alright, so let's paste in our text style. We're going to update our variable name, and we're just going to say default UI text style. Let's do export const. Let's update our imports to have our asset keys. Now if we come back to our game over scene, let's copy our phaser import. We'll paste at the top of our common file. So now back in our game over scene, let's remove our menu text style. We'll update our imports in here, and so we'll have our default UI text style. Let's copy that. We'll update our references. So now if we come back to our UI scene, let's update our text game object here to use that same style. Much better. So now for our new component, we're going to want to hide this by default. So let's do this. We'll do our dialog container. We'll do visible. We're going to set it equal to be false. And now we just need a way to show our component to our player once our player collects one of our items from our chest. For this, we'll add a new event to our event bus that we can emit from our game scene. So let's jump over to our event bus. Let's add in our new custom event. We're going to call this show dialog. And then while we're here, let's add in one more event. So once our player has read our dialogue, we'll need a way to actually close it. And so we'll emit an event from our UI when we close our dialogue so we can listen for that in our game scene. So let's do dialogue closed. Now if we come back to our UI scene, let's listen for a new event. So let's copy this line of code here. Now for our event, we're going to call this show dialogue. We'll add in a new method for this. We're going to call this show dialogue. Let's copy this line of code so we can turn off our event listener. We'll change this to be off. Let's copy our name. Let's come down to the bottom of our class. Now let's do public. We'll do our show dialogue. Now when we call this method, we're going to expect our message that we want to display to our player. So we'll add that as an argument. For our type, this will be a string. For our method, we won't return anything. And now when we call this method, now we want to make our container visible. So we'll do this. We'll do our dialog container, our visible. We'll set it to be true. And now we want to update our text game object with that text. So we'll do this. We'll do our dialog container text. Let's do set text. And we'll set it to be our message. So back up in our create method, let's update our text game object. We'll set our initial value to be an empty string. So now if we want to test our changes, let's go over to our game scene. Let's go to our handle open chest method. Down in our tooling configuration, in our onComplete handler, instead of having a time delay and then hiding our item, now we want to emit our event for showing our dialogue. So let's do our event bus. Let's do emit. Let's do our custom events. We want to do show dialogue. And now we want to show a message about the item we just got. So let's do our chest. We'll do our contents. And then let's remove our logic here where we do our delay call and we hide our item. So now if we want to quickly test our changes, let's go into our data manager. Let's update our starting room ID to be 5 and our starting door ID to be 2. So now when our browser refreshes, let's go open up our chest. Now our item will show up to our player, and now we show our dialog component with our new text. So now we just need to update our game scene so it'll be paused so our player can't move around, and then we'll need to listen for our event for closing our dialogue. So if we jump back to our game scene, after we emit our event, let's do this. We'll do our scene. Let's do pause. So we'll pause our existing scene. And now we'll want to listen for our dialog closed event. So if we go to our method where we register our custom events, let's copy our line of code. Let's paste this. And now we'll do our custom events. Let's do our dialog closed. Let's make a new method. We're going to call this handle dialog closed. Let's copy that line of code. Let's add it to our shutdown event, and we'll change this to be off. Let's copy our method name. We'll come down to the bottom of our class. Let's add in that new method. So now in this method, we won't return anything. So now in our method, we'll just want to hide a reward item, and then we want to resume our current scene. So let's do this. We'll do our reward item. Let's do set visible. We'll do false. Now we'll do this. Our scene. We'll call the resume method. So now before we test, we need to update our UI scene to emit out our new event. So inside our show dialog method, let's do this. We're going to do our time. Let's do a delayed call. Let's do 3000 milliseconds. Now in our callback, we'll hide our dialog container. So we'll do visible. We're going to set it to be false. And now let's do our event bus. Let's do emit. Now we'll do our custom events, and we'll do our dialog closed. All right, so when we save, let's come back to our browser. Let's open up our chest. We'll see our game pauses. We display our message. After our 3 seconds, we hide our item and our dialog modal. Nice. Now that we have our dialog modal working, we're going to update our text that we're displaying to our player. Right now, we're just displaying our reward contents, and so that's not very helpful. Instead, we want to display something like, if you find a small key, we'd say, hey, you found a small key. You can use this to open a locked door. Or if you get the map, you'll say, hey, you got the map. You can use this to see your current position and the rest of the dungeon. And so to add in these custom messages, we're going to want to have a map of our reward contents to the custom message we want to display. So for that, if we come into our common file, let's copy our code for our dungeon item. We'll paste it. Let's update our object name, and we'll call this chest reward to dialog map. It's now for each of our rewards, we'll want to display our custom message. So I'm going to paste over our messages we want to display. So for our small key, we'll say, you found a small key. You can use this to open locked doors. For our boss key, we'll say, you got the big key. This is the master key of the dungeon. It can open many locks that small keys cannot. For our map, we'll say you got the map. You can use it to see your current position and the rest of the dungeon with the key the player should press. And then for our compass, we'll say you found the compass. Now you can pinpoint the lair of the dungeon's evil master. And now for our map, now we just need to add in when there's nothing inside our chest. And so we'll add in nothing. And now for this text, we'll just do ... and we'll say the chest was empty. So now that we have our new map of the text we want to display, let's jump back over to our game scene. So now let's go into our handle open chest method. Inside our method, instead of passing our chest contents, we'll want to reference our new variable, and so we'll do our chest reward to dialog map. And now for our key, we'll pass in our chest contents, and now if we save, if we come back to our browser, if we open up our chest, we'll see now we have our map with our custom message. And if we try opening up our other chest, we should see our new custom message for our compass show up. Nice. Finally, for our dialog component, there's one more change we need to make. Once our player opens up our chest, they're still able to actually move around our map until we pause our scene. Instead, we want to lock our player's input and keep them in our open chest state until we close our dialog, and then we want to go back to our idle state. To make that change, let's go into our open chest state. So now in our state, after we emit our event for where we open up our chest, instead of transitioning right to our idle state, we'll want to listen for our event for when our dialog's closed, and then transition our player back to our idle state. To do that, we'll do our event bus, we'll do the once method, and now we want to listen for our custom events, and we'll do dialog closed. And now in our callback, this is where we'll do our transition to our idle state. So let's copy that line of code, we'll place it in here. Let's get rid of our to-do. So now back in our browser, if we have our player open up our chest, we'll see now our player stays in that state, and they're not able to move around until after we close our dialog, and now they can start moving again. Nice. So now that we're done testing our changes, let's come back to our data manager, and let's reset our starting room ID and our starting door ID. With that last change, we've wrapped up our UI component section. In this part, we built the foundation for our HUD, dialog system, and game over screen. These components provide a solid base that we can extend later with new functionality, such as displaying collected items in the HUD, allowing players to save and quit after dying, adding NPC interactions for conversations and quests, triggering storing events to enhance the game's narrative. Now that we have a functional UI, it's time to introduce the ultimate challenge, our dungeon's boss enemy. That's it for this part of the series. If you found this helpful, be sure to hit the like button. It really helps out the channel. And if you're following along, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. If you have any questions or want to share your progress, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Alright, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.